evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Donna Penyak, and on behalf of the Barrington 220 Educational Foundation, I'd like to welcome you to our third annual Alumni Legends event. This program is aimed at inspiring students to learn from successful BHS alumni to pursue their dreams. We are very fortunate and honored to have alum Mr. Henry Paulson Jr. as our guest speaker this evening. The foundation is celebrating 15 years of supporting Barrington 220 schools with over $2.3 million in projects, programs, and enhancements that are not otherwise paid for by tax dollars. Our support reaches to every school and every grade level. With donations and your support of programs such as this, we are currently adding to our list of projects a second year of support for the incubator class, which I hope many of you were able to quickly tour. And this is an entrepreneurial curriculum teaching students how to create, develop, and start their own businesses. A second project for us this year is a class that introduces engineering, technology, and robotics at the middle school. It's to lay the groundwork for pre-engineering classes offered at the high school. Our time is limited this evening, so I would just ask that you take a moment to read about our past projects on the bookmark you were given earlier, and view our website about our organization and how to donate. This evening, I'd like to extend a special thank you of support for this event to our premier sponsor, BMO Private Bank, a financial management company involved in the community for over 50 years. Our gracious alumni legend guest, Mr. Henry Paulson Jr., and our moderator, Mr. Jack Train, are both celebrating their 50th class reunion. They met in the 8th grade at Countryside School, became fast friends, and I'm told have shared many adventures together in Barrington. A bit of background on our moderator: Jack Train taught chemistry at BHS right after college and coached the freshman football team, but after 1 year was drafted into the Army. Once he served, he went on to graduate with a master's degree in architecture and now has his own development management and consulting company. We are most thankful that he has chosen to spend his birthday with us tonight. Hank Paulson graduated BHS as a champion wrestler and standout football player. Went on to graduate from Dartmouth and received a Master of Business Administration degree from Harvard. He rose to the ranks at Goldman Sachs to Chief Executive Officer and was nominated as Secretary of the Treasury in 2006. I'm sure you're looking forward to hearing more about his life through his own words this evening. Our format tonight will include an interview and time for questions and answers from the audience. Before I bring them on stage, I have a brief trailer to share. I hope you enjoy the program. Thanks.
By anyone's measure, we are living in extraordinary times.
Prices are at an all-time high.
My goal had not been to go to Washington.
I'm pleased to announce that I will nominate Henry Paulson to be the Secretary of the Treasury.
I didn't really know President Bush. I thought there was a high likelihood there'd be a financial crisis when he was president.
20,000 jobs
Third
lost.
quarter losses of nearly $4
The latest financial giant in distress.
We are watching this market
the lowest level in 15 years.
None of us understood the extent of what we're dealing with. Bear Stearns, Merrill Lynch, Lehman Brothers. Holy moly, how could this be happening?
Economists believe we are now in a recession.
I saw this moving from Wall Street to Main Street.
Every day, the American people get angrier.
losing farms and homes.
Breaking me, for real.
We needed to do something dramatic.
We cannot simply assist Wall Street.
He wanted $750 billion from Congress.
Hank was led to do things that were offensive to him.
Too big to fail is definitely not acceptable.
Congress has to act. We're out of options.
New York City fat cats expect Joe's six-pack to pay for all this nonsense.
The public wanted to hear those that made the mistakes are going to be held accountable.
And next month, they're going to come back and ask for more.
What we did was not for these banks. It was to save Main Street from a catastrophe. It's important that there be a historical record so we don't replay this movie all over again.
Everyone, please help me welcome Mr. Jack Train and our guest of honor, Mr. Henry Paulson.
Good evening. Just so you know, I'm totally blind right now. And when it comes time for questions, I hope the lights will make it easier for me to see you all. Secretary Paulson is a graduate of Barrington High School, as you know. Hank and I grew up together. We had a wonderful childhood, and our friendship has continued through the present day. We're going to start with a casual discussion of half a dozen questions, and then we're going to open up the floor to all of you out there. What I'll do is I'll look out there. I'd like people with questions to stand. I'll point the finger at you, and one of the ushers will come with a microphone. Address your question to Hank. You prefer that you call him Hank. And this should be an informative, relaxed evening. So let me start off with something that is appropriate to both of us because we went through the Barrington school system and graduated from here. Hank, what role did the Barrington schools play in your life?
First of all, Jack, thank you, and thank you all for being here tonight. The Barrington schools played a really important role in my life, and I look back with fond memories. I went to High Street School. I remember a fifth grade teacher, Mr. Peterson, who just was very pivotal in my life, inspired me. Great love of history came from his class. I remember at Countryside School, Mr. Wingate, and that's right, all the natural history, and the star maps looked like he just took his fountain pen and went like this, and like, dots all over the page. And then I felt that when I left Barrington High School, I was really well prepared for college afterwards and business school. So again, schools were just, as far as I'm concerned, first rate.
So, how did you end up becoming Secretary of the Treasury?
I guarantee you I didn't apply for the job. Which is, in all seriousness, it's sort of serendipitous because a president has to ask you, and normally when someone gets asked, they get some kind of relationship with the president. I didn't know George Bush. I had turned him down the first couple of times he had asked, and the third time when they came back, the idea was that I was to have dinner with him in the residency of the White House the night before the president of China, Hu Jintao, was going to be having a lunch there. And I'd been asked to lunch, and as the dinner got closer, I recognized I shouldn't have dinner with the president because I didn't want to turn him down. And so I canceled at the last minute. We went into lunch, and both President Bush and Vice President Cheney were noticeably cold to me. When we were walking out, it was a beautiful day, and I was walking out with Wendy, and she, I saw the Treasury building, and I'll comment on that later. And I thought of my early days in Washington where I'd gone over and worked with George Shultz there. And I guess she could see I was, sort of a little bit somber. She said, well, I hope you didn't turn it down for me, sweetie, because if it was really important to you, I would have agreed to do it. And I said, well, no. So when they came back another time, a few weeks later, and I decided that I really needed to take the job, and because it occurred to me that maybe the reason I hadn't taken it before was fear of failure. That I loved what I was doing, running Goldman Sachs. I knew I could do that well. I was going around giving speeches to business schools saying welcome change, and I couldn't think of very many people that had gone to Washington and left with a higher reputation than they come with. And as soon as that occurred to me, I then said, boy, if I'm shying away from this because I'm afraid of failure, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to accept it. And I accepted it when I called Wendy to tell her everything. That was one of the toughest times in our marriage. And that was nothing compared to what it was like in my mother. She said, you started off with Richard Nixon and you're finishing with George Bush and you should be ashamed of yourself. And so, but it turned out to be a wonderful experience for me, and Wendy very much, as did I, developed a really good relationship with the president. The last thing, I will be briefer on every other question. The last thing I'll say, I can't see in the lights whether there's young people here, but in case there are, I will say I did not have a plan to become Secretary of the Treasury. I think the two things that qualified me were working in government and running a big global investment bank. And I didn't have a plan for either of those. I was an English major in college. I was going to go to Oxford and study English. I had a low number in the draft, so I got into ROTC at Harvard, and I got into business school when I was young. And I didn't know anything about business, and then I ended up having a professor who had a close friend who was very senior in the Pentagon, and I ended up taking a job working in a special group at the Pentagon at a high level, and then I ended up from there working in the White House as a young person. And I didn't even know what an investment banker did before I worked there, and it was there that I didn't like. I'm not an economist. I took a couple economics courses in college and didn't do particularly well. I didn't like them, but I found I liked working on economic analysis and problem solving, and I picked Goldman Sachs because they told me I could live and work in Chicago and I'd never have to go to New York, and that was true until I had to go there to run the firm. So again, I won't be as lengthy in other questions, but I'm always a little bit suspicious of career engineers. Someone, that comes out of their mother's womb and know they want to be an investment banker, or that, that they know they're going to have a senior job in government or be a CEO. You've got to focus on the matter at hand, I think, and then these things tend to unfold.
Hank, just to tag on to that question, how did you deal with the stress and the pressure of being the Secretary of the Treasury?
During the financial crisis.
Particularly during the financial crisis.
Because, well, I would just say that. I think everybody in this room probably dealt with it in one way or the other. I mean, we all went through it together. The thing I say, which is hard for some people to grasp, but we've all gone through stressful periods, crises. And when you're going through a crisis, it's a crisis. So I always say, if you're boiling oil at 150 degrees, it doesn't make much difference. If you're boiling oil, it doesn't make much difference if it's 150 degrees or 200 degrees or 180 degrees, you're boiling in oil. And so I had been through crises at Goldman Sachs, and even though this was much more visible, and I was, in a fishbowl and the stakes were higher, they almost, every time you're in a crisis, the stakes seem very high. So as I dealt with it, during the day, it was always relatively easy because I just was going the whole time. I mean, just around the clock for you know, multiple hours. I would have a phone log where I would, you know, where I would make sometimes hundreds of calls during the day. I had all sorts of meetings, and when you're playing offense, so the tough times were at night. If you wake up, go to the bathroom, whatever, and when you're tired late at night, little problems seem big, and big problems seem insurmountable. But I'd say the other thing was, you know, Wendy was very helpful, and my religion and prayer were very helpful.
After leaving the Treasury, you came back to Barrington. Why was that?
Well, I'll give you a longer answer, but the short, simple answer was it was Wendy's time to choose. I chose I chose going to Washington, and she had gone to New York, and she'd gone to Washington. This had always been our home. We kept our home here. This was a primary residence for the first 24 years of my career at Goldman Sachs. So this was a primary residence right up, you know, until 1995. And then we were 12 years in New York, and then in Washington. I knew I didn't want to stay in Washington. And, you know, my mom's here, we have family here. The place is beautiful because we're, you know, there's thousands of acres of forest preserve. And Wendy has been very active, you know, with Citizens for Conservation. And so we have, you know, just a beautiful natural world to enjoy. And this community is home, and the institutes at the University of Chicago. But basically, it wasn't a long discussion or debate. You know, she said we're coming back, and I said, okay.
You touched on conservation. You have a lifelong history in caring for the environment and conservation matters. Could you expand on some of the things you've done and want to continue to do?
Well, first of all, the lifelong interest was in the outdoors and wild, beautiful places and nature, and, you know, Jack, all the things that you and I did together as kids, and the canoe trips up in Canada, fishing, and you know, all of those things. That was my interest. Conservation and the organized work in conservation came through Wendy. And I remember you know, the first job I had, I started off at $30,000 a year, and we borrowed money from both parents to barely, you know, or even before that, before we came here, when I was in GS 11 at 11 or 12,000, and when he was teaching, that was the first shock. But she came, good news. I got a lifetime membership in the Nature Conservancy, and I got it for $500 before it went up. You know, I almost had it fit. But she got involved with the Nature Conservancy, chaired the Illinois board and the New York board, got me interested, and then I ultimately became very interested, and then ended up being chairman of the board of the Nature Conservancy, and it just great satisfaction, and it's what I'm doing to this day. But I set up the Asia Pacific Council of the Nature Conservancy years ago, and there it is. I just think that, you know, all of us have got to figure out how to balance our vocation with avocation, and I just think it gives great pleasure to have something outside of work where you can do and really make a difference.
You just mentioned that word, work. What are you doing now?
Well, what I'm doing now is I'm doing nothing that's commercial. So I'm doing several things. I've set up the Paulson Institute, which is an NGO. It's headquartered at the University of Chicago. got 30 people, 15 in Beijing. We've got them in Washington, New York, and here. And the focus is on it's on China, furthering the relationship between the U.S. and China, because I view that as the most complex, difficult, and important relationship there is. Because if we can make that work, we've got a better chance of solving almost any global economic or environmental problem, or many foreign policy and national security issues. If we can't, we're going to have problems with those. And the way we do this is through programs. I call it a think and do tank. And so all of the programs are around the economic relationship and the environmental relationship and sustainability. We just set up a climate change and air quality program in China. We have programs focused on conservation, wetlands conservation, and again, they're focusing on the coastal tidal mudflats and so on, preserving those. We have programs aimed at cross-investment, promoting cross-investment, and we have programs that are built around sustainable urbanization, because the next 300 million people going to the cities in China will drive global economic outcomes, environmental outcomes. I've also chair a Latin American Conservation Council that has roughly 40 CEOs, IBM, Coke, Pepsi, Caterpillar, Cargill, Dow, Bunge, and 35 or so Latin American CEOs from 10 different countries, and a number of others, and we're focusing on big conservation issues. Nature-based solutions to save a watershed, water security. How do you increase food production without destroying habitats, smart infrastructure development. And lastly, I'm finishing stages of a book on China called Dealing with China, which will be out next spring.
Sounds great. What insights can you give to this audience about leadership?
Well, in terms of leadership, I happen to think that there are certain traits that every leader has, beginning with the fact that they surround themselves with outstanding people who complement their skills. So I've worked with many leaders. I've advised heads of state. For 25 years I worked with CEOs, and there is no such thing as a perfect leader. So every leader has weaknesses which are the flip side of the strength. Hank is candid, Hank is indiscreet. Hank is decisive, Hank acts without thinking. And so the leaders, and what happens is you move up, the more senior you get, these big jobs always uncover your weaknesses unless you surround yourself with people who you listen to, so you can play to your strengths and they can help you compensate for your weaknesses. Every leader, a good leader I know, runs to problems rather than running away from them. So they just and so they're accountable. And the other thing I would say, every good leader I've seen cares about people, and that he's taking a real interest in the people that works for you, not just smiling and saying hi to them, but taking an interest in their careers. And if you do that, they'll go to the end of the world for you and cover up for a lot of weaknesses and help you succeed. But it's got to be sincere. They can smell a phony, and then the two other things I'd say about leadership are that every good leader I know defines their job expansively, and you can see this in someone. I can see this in the youngest person we would hire wherever I work. if you ask them to do something and they just narrowly did exactly what you told them, that was fine. But the really good ones said, how does this fit into the bigger picture? Why is he asking this question? You know, they always do more. So I always said people promoted themselves before I promoted them. And then the last thing is good leaders are all about integrity. And that isn't just about obeying the law. You've got to do that. But it is about doing the right thing. And it's never interesting to me why a few bad people do bad things. You know, that's why you have jails. And it's not interesting why good people do good things. It's very interesting and perplexing why good people do bad things. And I think it's up to a boss to set up an environment and a tone where you don't get into a group thing. And if something doesn't feel right, people ask questions. So I think those are the things that leaders do. But if they're young people out here, I just say to them, because I hear so many people saying, well, I want to be a leader, but I want to lead this or that. And before you're a leader, you've got to be good at something. I mean, you've got to be good at whatever your field of expertise is, because people aren't going to want to follow you if you don't know your stuff.
I think the last question that I'll ask you before we open it up to the audience is, what advice do you have for the students here?
Well, for students here, I guess I would say this. First of all, don't worry if you don't know what you want to do. It's the rare student that really does. I think the important thing is to be really finding those things that you do well and continue to learn. You can afford anything other than to not learn. And all the way through your first, that's the most important thing whenever you take on a job is to learn. So the next thing I would say to them is ultimately what you're going to want to do is find something that you do well and you enjoy. And usually the things go together. You know, it's hard to think of someone who's really going to enjoy something they don't do well. And it's hard to find someone who's going to do well in something they don't enjoy. It's amazing how many students or young people try to get themselves in a job because it sounds good or because their parents want it or they think they can make a lot of money or whatever. And so the key thing is to find that niche and have the right self-awareness. And then whatever you do, your first job, so the key thing is not whether the job sounds good, but whether you're going to keep learning. The second thing I would say is something I've been worried about a lot for younger people, and I'm really glad to see this incubator I visited at the school, because there's a trend that's going on which has to do with automation and technology and software, and almost every innovation I see is destroying jobs. So the middle is getting hollowed out. And so technology, a lot of the jobs that we traditionally had aren't going to be there. And so when you think, and you hear a lot about artificial intelligence and robotics and so on. So when you start and you think about this, you should always say, what job can't be destroyed? Routinized jobs, you know, can be destroyed, they will be destroyed. But jobs that require you to work with others, and computers aren't going to do that. And as a matter of fact, there are very few problems that you find in business or in government that, you know, it takes a rocket scientist to solve them. The solutions aren't that difficult to work out the solution. The key thing is getting them done. And so they're all people issues. So the ability to work with people, and those people skills are important. And too often schools don't teach those. You know, matter of fact, you get in trouble if you work too closely with others. They call it cheating. but there's got to be ways where the Because those are the skills, those people skills, and then figuring out those things where you've got a differentiating advantage, and you're going to join and you're going to do well, because there's going to be tremendous opportunities out there in the future. I don't mean to scare you, right? Great opportunities, but you've got to be thoughtful about it.
Thank you. If you could bring the house lights up so that I can see the audience, that would be helpful, and we'll start taking questions from you.
Let me just say this on the questions. There's nothing you can ask that's a dumb question. There's nothing you can ask that will offend me. I've been in front of congressional committees. I really mean it. You'll ask any single question on anything you want. You know, on China, on Treasury, whatever. I've been in the financial service business for 45 years, and young my clients and myself, I'd like to thank you for your leadership during that oil crisis. Independent position in that spot with your background and handle over everything. But, you know, you've had a long history in China. I know you mentioned some of the things, but as China goes from a government spending economy to a consumer spending economy, what do you see of the fall, you know, the problems there? Obviously, do you think it'll work long term? You know, as their class of people become, you know, more and more wealthy and so on and so forth. So, because I know that's very important, you know, it's important to the world. But there's going to be a lot of challenges there. Well, yes, you got it. Your question shows you understand a lot about it. China is changing dramatically. And so today it's a $10 trillion economy. Unless something goes terribly wrong, they will be bigger than the U.S., you know, sometime in the next, you know, 5-10 years. But China, so there's been enormous successes over the last 30 years, but with those successes have come enormous problems. And they now have a economic model that's run out of steam. It doesn't work. It's not going to keep working because the way they grew was at massive government investment in infrastructure and in fixed investment, energy-intensive manufacturing to export products to the world. But that's not going to work in the future. So how they rebalance this while they've got tremendous environmental problems, just tremendous. I mean, people are dying from the dirty air, and the population is not going to tolerate that. There's big social stresses. So they've had a very strong leader come on, Xi Jinping, and he is consolidated power. Like you'd have to go back many years to find someone who's consolidated the power that he has. And he's doing some very dramatic things. People are scared throughout China right now, many of them, because he's basically said, I need to modernize and reform the government. I don't have the institutions to do what I need to do. And the only strong institution is the party, the Communist Party. But this is a party without an ideology because no one there is for communism. I mean, that's been discredited. And so to cleanse the party, he's trying to really cut back on corruption. So there's this anti-corruption campaign that's just taking people up to the wall. Not just business and government, but academia, the media throughout. And so there's all this change going on right now. He's laid out a 7-year plan to do that. The plan is really, when you're in China, you know that people understand their problems because they talk freely about it. But to get that done, it's easier said than done. I'm sure there's going to be some bumps in the road. But the thing I keep, and the other thing is China's just not going to accept the status quo. They don't want to be just like us. He said, we don't want a political system like you. We're not looking to become a Western democracy. You know, I'm looking to to do all sorts of things to help the Chinese people. And so there's going to be some tension, but I'll tell you, if China has problems, we'll feel it. They're a big part. You know, what's good for us in terms of our economic growth, if we do well, their economy, they'll do well. And if they keep growing, there's going to be increasing opportunities for us, but we have to fight for and help the reformers there to continue to open up the markets in China so that we participate.
Next question, please stand. Please stand.
There's not too many times you get to say thank you for helping save the world to someone in the presence. So I'd like to offer that first. 6 years ago, the biggest banks had to be saved because their imminent collapse would have triggered a catastrophic financial mess. It seems that 6 years later, the biggest banks are bigger than where we were last time. Have we done enough to prevent a similar thing from happening again?
Okay. In terms of the financial crisis, here's the way I think about this. As long as you have economic systems and financial institutions, you're going to have financial crises. You know, in every country, there's no economic system that does away with financial crises. And whether they're over 8 or 10 or 12 years or whatever you have. So the key is to be able to manage them in a way that they don't spill over and do big damage to the real economy. And the key to that is not having the excesses build up so you have huge bubbles, and making sure you have the authorities to deal with the crisis when it comes. And as I look at it, we have, in terms of the authorities, we have a lot of authorities that we would like to have had that we didn't have. The biggest one being the authority to be able to deal with a failing non-bank and wind them down, you know, so they just don't go into bankruptcy. But there's a fair number of other authorities we have in terms of all the big complex institutions now have a single regulator, at least one, a common regulator in the Fed. They're better capitalized. You know, I could just go through a number of things we have. They're better. So I think today we have the best financial system in the world. You know, if you look at the depth and breadth of the financial system, people worry about the big banks. There's been a lot of focus on the big banks. I'm saying that but the underlying cause of every financial crisis, the banks always make a lot of mistakes. They get all the blame. They should get a lot of the blame. But the underlying cause are always flawed government policies. What were the policies that made, you know, that led to overborrowing for homes? Okay, the programs to incentivize and over-incentivize borrowing, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and mortgage deduction, all the federal home loan programs, and so on. That hasn't been corrected yet. So we still, I'm not predicting another problem soon, but that is an underlying problem. The biggest concern I have is frankly some of the things that are happening outside of the U.S. I'm not predicting this, but if China were to have a major financial crisis, we would feel it in the U.S. But Europe didn't do the things that we did. They did not recapitalize their banks. We went out and we recapitalized 600 banks and did it very quickly. They still haven't done that, and they've got some real problems they need to work through. I think that's going to go on for a long time. But overall, I'm not predicting a major the financial crisis in this country, but the things I watch closely are, are events outside, because we're in a global economy. But our banks, I think, are very well capitalized and very well regulated now.
Next question. We have one up. Get you next.
Hank, I've known you a long time, and you mentioned that an inherent part of leadership is integrity. And in all honesty, I don't know of anybody in my life that I've met that has more integrity than you do. And one thing I do believe is that integrity or character is destiny. In 2008, I sent you an email when you were going through everything you're going through, and I know two things for sure. Number one, you're getting thousands of emails a day, and number two, you don't know how to turn on a computer, so I'm sure you never read the email. But paraphrasing what I wrote to you, I said that keep the faith. I am certain that history will be very kind to you. I'm going to ask you a very personal question. That is, if being very, very clinical, thinking about your career and everything that you've done, thinking as a historian, how is history going to view Hank Paulson?
It's an interesting thing, because when I left Treasury, there was some poll I saw where the TARP, which is the Temporary Asset Relief Program, that was the vehicle we used for the rescues of bailout, that 90% of the American people were against that. And the same poll, 60% were against torture. And it bothered me a good bit, because also it said, like, some high percentage were afraid we were going to have another Great Depression. But then the more I thought about it, the more it occurred to me that if people didn't know how close we came to economic Armageddon, there's no way they can understand it. That bailouts are not something we should be applauding as a nation. If people take risks, and you expect to get the reward, they should also get Uncle Sam there. And so most of the American people will never understand it. And so I really don't think about it, that I've written a book. I think people that were there, people I care about, were the people that were there and worked with me. And it was an interesting thing, because if you, I had Stan McChrystal, who was a decorated general. I did a lot of outstanding things, and famously got fired by Barack Obama for misspeaking to Rolling Stone. He did a class on leadership at Yale, and I participated in that. And he was trying to equate some of the things we did at, the TARP and the financial rescues, the war, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and so on. And I said that although there may be certain similarities, they're very different. And, we didn't have people, as some people said, landing in Omaha Beach and having fire and risking their lives. But the other thing is, often when people come home from a war, they're heroes. And I had sort of the reverse thing. When I was sitting around the table, and they're saying, now, who would like to go work on the Citigroup bailout? Now, let me tell you, if you, unless you were a moron, and we didn't want morons working with us, you knew that if you worked on it, of course, if you didn't succeed, you were going to be part of Andrew Mellon's team was we had another Great Depression. And if you did succeed, you were going to be investigated for a long time for bailouts, and people were going to hate that. And so there were a lot of people that would run away, and that the people, if someone cared a lot about politics, and it was an elected official or wanted to be elected official, they were worthless. Because you just can't ask someone to stand up and do something that's bad and unpopular. George Bush was extraordinary because he just, all the way through this, he just simply said, forget about the polls or the politics, do what it takes to save the country. So I guess that's a long answer to say that I don't know, but what I care about are the people that really understood what was going on, the people I worked with most closely. It's very easy for someone, and I'm very reluctant when people are criticizing this president or other presidents, sitting way back without all the facts. No one goes there trying to do a bad job. Everybody's working hard. But I think the things we did are never going to be understood by a whole lot of people, and never going to be popular. And I don't think I want them to be popular.
We have a gentleman over here, then we'll go over there. Thank you.
And thank you. My name is Ed Roney. I've lived here over 35 years, 3 children and 3 grandchildren graduated from Barrington High School. My question has to do with the 2008 banking crisis. And I, like everyone else, was blindsided by it. And undertook some research, how in the world did this happen? Nobody seemed to know about it. And what I found is a number of reasons, but the one that really stood out was something called subprime mortgages. I had no idea what subprime mortgage was, never heard of it. Well, looked it up. Definition is mortgage taken out by a homeowner who has no way to pay it back. No way to pay it back unless the housing market keeps rising forever. Well, how many things rise forever in the financial world? So my question then comes down to who was advising President Bush on all of this? The president was running around giving ownership society speeches as if he created this monster. It actually was created in 1997 when the Clinton administration, but most of the steam built up and exploded during the Bush administration. And Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac seemed to have incentives, put incentives out in the banking industry to take out a whole lot of subprime mortgages. And then, while I was doing this, I listened to a lecture by a Harvard professor, Neil Ferguson, who said, oh, make no mistake about it, this banking crisis was the fault of the U.S. government. That was exactly the conclusion that I came to.
Right.
So how did it happen? How did this happen?
Well, so let me give you my best explanation, because it was fascinating. When I arrived in 2006 in July, I was asked to go to Camp David for the first meeting with the president of the economic team and talk about entitlements reform, Fannie and Freddie and Social Security. And I said, well, Mr. President, I'd like to talk about something else. And I think that we are due for a financial crisis because I don't know. And he said, what will cause it and when will it come? And I said, sir, I don't know, because I didn't see the '98 crisis coming with a Russian default. I didn't see what happened in '94, but afterwards it'll be obvious with 2020 hindsight. Now, I think the reason many people saw subprime and saw some of the excesses, but the reason people didn't see the extent of the problem was this. And I think some of you who, maybe if there's some residential retail brokers here, you'll understand what I'm saying. That if you go back, ever since World War II, we had no nationwide significant decline in home prices. And the reason we hadn't was we had all these policies that were promoting housing prices. So we had the interest rate deduction I don't have one, but if I wanted to have $1 million mortgage, I could have $1 million mortgage and deduct interest. How is that fair to someone who rents? There was, the Fannie and Freddie were subsidizing, 50% of the mortgages in this country, which means that the market wasn't setting it. There were a lot of incentives like this. So what happens if you were an investor and you had a diversified pool of residential mortgages, what history showed you, in its recent history, was the risk you took wasn't that you weren't going to get your money back. The risk was you'd get your money back too soon, because if interest rates dropped, then the borrower would repay and you'd get your money back. And so it wasn't taking a long enough look. And then you saw, but despite that, and I'll just wrap it up very quickly, despite that, I immediately wanted to go and work on Fannie and Freddie. And then there was this huge political fight. One party was pressing, for them to do more lending. The other party wanted to line up the Potomac, and there was no compromise. And the president agreed to let me go start working with Barney Frank, who was a liberal Democrat then, to way back in 2006 to try to fix them. And it took them almost going down to get the authorities we needed in 2008. Because there was so much lobbying pressure and there's so divided in Congress. So a lot of, when I'll say to you, your research confirmed, you tell me what the crisis was and I'll tell you what the flawed policy was. Because there was it starts with the flaws in, one of the flaws that caused us to want to borrow too much and save too little. And if you look at the 10 years before the financial crisis, the bubble years, median income was flat. The average family borrowings had doubled. People were borrowing much more than they could afford to try to maintain a standard of living that they couldn't maintain. And a lot of the jobs that existed during that time weren't real jobs. They were building homes people really couldn't afford to buy or making products they couldn't afford to buy. So it's just so it gets back to U.S. competitiveness. What we need to do to fix that.
I'm going to take one over here, and then I'll come back to you.
And I will promise these two, I'm going to keep your question brief, and I'll make my answer about half as long as the other ones.
Thank you, Secretary Paulson. Could you comment on your, earlier, you talked about China. What are your worries about, there've been a lot of pressing about them, all the properties that they're buying, they're getting their own property bubble that could be coming. Can you comment on that and your worries?
On the property bubble?
Yes, in China.
They've got one. So what they've done in China is they've got a broken municipal finance system. Simply put, mayors don't have access to many revenues. Only about 15% of the national revenues get back to the mayors, and mayors don't have the ability to tax. And while U.S. mayor maybe is responsible for 25% of the total spending at most, police, fire, education, a lot comes from the federal government or the state. In China, you've got all the education, you have responsibility for all of the entitlements programs, and they don't have the revenues. So what do? They take land from the farmers, they sell it to developers, and you have urban sprawl. And so you've got a lot of the growth has been driven by debt-financed real estate. And they're aware of this, but you can't fix the problem unless you fix the underlying problem, which is they need new fiscal policies and they need new tax reform on a nationwide basis. So they're working to fix that while they're trying to manage this other thing. So I can't tell you, what's the danger that these things are unknowable. The definition of a bubble, with hindsight is 2020, but a bubble by definition is something that the market doesn't understand fully until it breaks, right? And so right now people know there's a problem in China and they're working to deal with it. I think it's a significant problem, but they're knowledgeable, and there's a lot of leverage at the individual level, the municipal level, but at the national level they don't have much debt. They have a lot of foreign exchange reserves. If they have it right, I think it's manageable without doing too much damage to their economy. But it's difficult to know.
Yes, I'd like to ask you about a problem that I currently see to the National Treasury, and that is the conditions which give rise to our largest corporations, our largest American corporations, to leave the country for tax inversions. And I see that as a continuing trend for billions of dollars of reasons. And it seems the current administration's answer to that problem is to issue more regulations. And I suspect you might have a different answer to what could be done there to slow the trend of corporate inversions.
Yeah, I do. It is like so many things in Washington. I didn't see anything easy. There's some things that are analytically simpler, like this, but they're politically complex. So there's not low-hanging fruit. So just to understand the situation, we have a tax system that's out of step with the rest of the world because it was created when we were dominant and all of our global companies were dominant. And so the tax system basically saying you pay rate for the U.S. and then you pay the foreign tax rate, but if the foreign tax rate is less than the U.S. tax rate, then we tax you for the addition. So we don't have the standard territorial system. So that means our companies around the world are at a competitive disadvantage. And then we say, but we don't tax you unless you bring the money back. So that incentivizes people to keep the money outside the country rather than bringing it back and investing it in America or giving it to American shareholders. And I think that the problem, if a gentleman asked me a question about what do we do to avoid financial crisis, I think the best thing we can do is increase our competitiveness. And you can't do that unless you get immigration reform, individual income tax reform, corporate tax reform. We have systems, that you need a system that says how is going to give you the revenue you need and let you maintain your competitiveness. And so our corporate tax system is so screwed up. Different companies pay different tax rates. There are all kinds of corporate preferences that don't make sense. I'll give you a huge one. There's a preference which is very unfair. There is a big corporate preference for healthcare. So if I happen to work for a major company and they want to give me a Cadillac healthcare program, then I don't pay taxes on that and they don't pay taxes. So it's a huge incentive. But how is that fair to the waitress or the construction worker whose company doesn't give anything, rather than having a same credit for everyone? So the tax system is riddled with problems. The way to solve this is corporate tax reform that encourages our companies to keep their money here, and keep their headquarters here, because it's a huge advantage for us to have their headquarters here. So that's, to me, not the right way to do it.
We are out of time. I have one other item to handle before everyone leaves. We want to be sure that they have the proper attire for this weekend for celebrating your reunion. A sweatshirt and a lovely